an objection to Rawls. Okay, so here's the fundamental disagreement, right, or a fundamental disagreement between Rawls and Nozick. For Rawls, what matters in terms of distributive justice is whether free, rational, and equal people deliberating together in conditions that are as fair as possible could agree to the relevant distribution. Right? That's Rawls' starting point. For Nozick, what matters in terms of distributive justice is how the relevant distribution was actually arrived at. Right? As long as it's the product of a series of individually fair moves, it's just no matter what shape it has now, no matter whether Rawls' contractors would agree to it, and so on. Now, a very interesting lesson we seem to have learned here is that these two initially plausible starting points seem to lead to very different conceptions of distributive justice. Right? So it's worthwhile, even if one of these views is much better than the other by your lights, or one of these two views is terrible by your lights, it's at least worth our while to see what happens when we try to follow these arguments where they lead. Right? So what should we conclude, or what new questions should we ask? Well, Nielsen will give us some new questions and some new options in a couple days. The final thing I want to talk about here, though, is a point of agreement. Right? One thing that I believe Rawls and Nozick would agree on, though for different reasons, is that our society, our distribution of primary social goods, is radically unjust. Okay. Nozick's theory is utterly useless to anyone who wants to justify existing inequalities or the capitalism or whatever which gave rise to them. Why? Why do I say that with such confidence? The actual history of property acquisition and transfer is thoroughly and completely infused with injustice. The actual history of property acquisition and transfer is thoroughly and completely infused with injustice. Right? Societies weren't formed, going back to the beginning, right, by a bunch of people agreeing to one another to establish a legitimate government or whatever. No, the way that most societies are formed is that some warlord kind of threatens other people to pay taxes to them and do what they say, or else they'll be killed, right? Which is kind of any property that arises on the basis of that kind of foundation is going to be unjust, according to Nozick, unless it's been compensated for, in which it hasn't, right? Looking at more particular events or kind of eras in history, right? The colonization of the quote-unquote New World and the African slave trade involved kind of massive, rampant, and systematically important injustices that just have not been adequately compensated for. They just have not. Right? Now, by Nozick's principles, right, so you might say, no, who cares about the past, right? What matters is how things are now. And look, I worked hard for what I got, or I signed a contract, so that I deserve what I have. Well, look, by Nozick's principles, the fact that you worked hard for what you have, or even that you signed a contract, is irrelevant, right? Your holdings are unjust. You are not entitled to those holdings unless your holdings were either acquired justly from nothing, right, where nobody had a title to them before, which they weren't, right, or your holdings have a pristine record of just transfers leading all the way from the initial holder to you, which they don't, or every single injustice in that history has been appropriately rectified. And that's not the case. None of our holdings now satisfy those criteria, which should freak you out a little bit, right? That means that none of us has the kind of permanent bequeathable property rights in anything that we quote unquote own that we thought we did, right? Which makes everything kind of pretty radically insecure. And we should try to figure out some way by which we could acquire something like property rights, like the ability to exclude others from the use of our stuff. Right? Now, don't take my word for any of this history stuff. Take history classes. But what we're going to need, it looks like, after all of this, after all these arguments against pattern theories, against end state principles, what it looks like we'll need, given this kind of rampant and uncompensated injustice throughout history, is we're going to need some end state principle to tell us how we should set things up now, right? So that maybe we could kind of get a Nozickian world going in the future. But insofar as we haven't compensated every injustice, no property is secure. No property is something we have a title to. And so Nozick's theory, uh, Nozick's theory not only does it imply that the existing distribution is radically unjust, but given his theory of entitlement, I think it basically is going to end up implying that none of us are entitled to any of our property, which is, can be kind of scary. All right, so that's it. Have a great day.